Grizzly bear attacks train station, killing 5 people on March 17th, 2025. The day started like any other. A train from Seattle was due at 3 p.m., carrying 30 passengers, families, hikers, a few college kids on spring break. At the station, Danny checked the schedule, joking with his co-worker Maria Lopez, a 29-year-old ticket agent with a quick laugh and a knack for calming nervous travelers. "Think we'll get any leprechauns today?" she teased, pinning a shamrock to her jacket. Nearby, a young couple, Ethan and Lily Harper, waited on a bench, their toddler Mia giggling as she chased a stray leaf. Ethan, a 34-year-old photographer, adjusted his camera, hoping to catch the sunset over the mountains. "This place is magic," he told Lily, her hand in his, their smiles bright with hope. But the wilderness had its own plans. Just beyond the station, in the dense forest where the Flathead River carved its path, a grizzly bear stirred. She was a mother, 600 pounds of muscle and fur, her 2 cubs trailing behind her, their bellies empty after a long winter. The scent of human food, spilled grain from a freight car, a discarded sandwich, drew her closer, her instincts sharpened by hunger. Grizzlies had been spotted near Whitefish more often lately, their territory squeezed by new housing developments and a late frost that killed off berry crops. "They're hungry!" a local ranger had warned Danny days before, his voice grim. "And hunger makes them bold." As the train's whistle sounded in the distance, Danny glanced at the clock, 2:55 p.m. The platform buzzed with anticipation, passengers gathering their bags, unaware of the shadow moving through the trees. The grizzly's paws crunched on the frost, her breath steaming in the cold, her eyes fixed on the station. In that moment, the line between man and wild blurred, and Whitefish was about to learn the cost of living so close to nature's edge. The Amtrak train rolled into Whitefish Station at 3:00 p.m. sharp, its brakes squealing as it slowed, steam rising from the tracks into the crisp March air. Passengers spilled onto the platform, their voices a cheerful hum, kids laughing, couples snapping photos, a group of hikers adjusting their packs for a Glacier Park trek. Danny Carver waved them in, his clipboard in hand, shouting over the noise, "Welcome to Whitefish. Watch your step." Maria Lopez handed out schedules, her shamrock pin glinting in the pale sunlight, her smile wide as she helped an elderly woman with her suitcase. The station felt alive, a snapshot of small-town warmth on St. Patrick's Day, 2025. But the forest held its breath. The grizzly mother, her cubs trailing close, emerged from the pines just beyond the station's freight yard, her nose twitching. At the scent of food, she was massive, her fur matted from a harsh winter, her eyes dark with intent. Hunger had driven her here. Grain spilled from a derailed car days ago, a trash bin overflowing with festival prep scraps. She'd been seen near town before, but never this close. "They're getting braver," a local trapper had told Danny. At the diner the week prior, his voice low. "Ain't enough for 'em out there no more." Danny had nodded, uneasy, but the station's bustle had pushed the warning to the back of his mind. It happened fast. The grizzly charged from the shadows, a blur of fur and fury, her roar splitting the air like thunder. Passengers froze, their laughter turning to screams as she barreled onto the platform, her cubs behind her, growling low. Danny dropped his clipboard, his heart slamming in his chest. "Get inside!" he shouted, shoving Maria toward the station door. She stumbled, her eyes wide with terror as the bear swiped at a luggage cart, sending bags flying. Ethan Harper scooped up Mia, his wife Lily clutching his arm, their faces pale as they ran for cover. But the platform was chaos. People tripping, shouting, a stampede of panic. The grizzly's rage was blind. She lunged at a hiker, a 22-year-old named Tyler Reed. His scream cut short as her claws tore through him, blood staining the wooden planks. A freight worker, Jim Dawson, 55, tried to distract her, waving his arms, but she turned on him, her jaws closing around his shoulder, his cries echoing as she dragged him down. Maria reached the station door, pulling passengers inside, but the Grizzly charged again, smashing through a glass window, her cubs snarling at her heels. Inside, Ethan and Lily hid behind a counter, Mia whimpering in their arms, while Danny grabbed a fire extinguisher, his hands shaking. "Stay back," he yelled, spraying the bear, but it only enraged her more. 3 more fell in the frenzy. A college student, a mother shielding her son, an elderly man too slow to run. 5 lives snuffed out in minutes. The platform a scene of blood and broken glass, the air thick with screams and the Grizzly's roars. The train's engineer, safe in his cab, radioed for help, his voice trembling. "Bear attack at Whitefish Station. We need rangers now." Outside, the Grizzly retreated, her cubs following, disappearing into the trees as quickly as they'd come, leaving behind a town forever changed. The sun dipped below the Rockies, casting a cold twilight over Whitefish train station as the chaos settled into an eerie silence. The platform, once alive with St. Patrick's Day cheer, was now a battlefield. Blood streaked the wooden planks, shattered glass glinted in the fading light, and the air hung heavy with the scent of fear and iron. 5 people were gone. Tyler Reed, the hiker, Jim Dawson, the freight worker, a college student named Emma Klein, a mother, Rachel Evans, who'd shielded her son, and an elderly man, Harold Tate. Their bodies lay covered with tarps, waiting for the coroner, while survivors huddled inside. The station, their faces pale, their voices hushed with shock. Danny Carver stood by the broken window, his hands still gripping the fire extinguisher, his hazel eyes hollow. "I couldn't stop her," he whispered, his voice cracking, the weight of the day pressing on his chest. Maria Lopez sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, her shamrock pin lost in the chaos. "We did what we could, Danny," she said, but her words felt empty, her hands trembling as she wiped tears from her cheeks. Ethan and Lily Harper held Mia tight, their toddler's cries muffled against Lily's shoulder, their eyes darting to the windows, half expecting the Grizzly to return. "We're alive," Ethan kept repeating, more to himself than to Lily, his camera abandoned on the floor. Rangers arrived an hour later, their boots heavy on the platform, their rifles ready. "She's gone," one of them, a grizzled man named Carl Bennett, told Danny, his voice grim. "Tracks lead north toward the river. She's got cubs, makes her unpredictable." Carl had seen this before. Grizzlies pushed closer to human spaces, their food sources dwindling. "Late frost killed the berries," he said, shaking his head. "And those new condos up the valley, they're cutting right into her territory." Danny nodded, his jaw tight. He'd heard the warnings, but no one thought a bear would charge a train station, not in broad daylight, not on a day meant for celebration. The town of Whitefish reeled. News trucks rolled in by nightfall, their lights harsh against the snowy hills, reporters clamoring for statements. 5 dead in Grizzly attack, the headlines would read, a tragedy that would ripple far beyond Montana. Clara Hensley, the 71-year-old farmer from your previous story, heard the news on her radio, her heart sinking as she thought of her own bobcats. "Nature don't care for our plans," she muttered, stirring her stew, the memory of Bramble's return still fresh. In Whitefish, the St. Patrick's Day festival was cancelled, the green streamers torn down, the town draped in grief. Danny drove home at midnight, his truck rattling down the dirt road, the station's blood-soaked platform burned into his mind. Sarah met him at the door, her arms wrapping around him, her voice soft. "You're here," she said. But Danny couldn't speak, the faces of the dead flashing behind his eyes. Sleep wouldn't come that night, nor the next. The Grizzly was still out there, her cubs at her side, and Whitefish was left to pick up the pieces, wondering how to live on the edge of a wild that refused to be tamed. The days after the Whitefish train station attack stretched long and heavy, the town cloaked in a fog of grief and fear. By March 20th, 2025, the Flathead Valley buzzed with the sound of helicopters, rangers scouring the forest for the Grizzly and her cubs, their tracks fading into the snowy wilderness. The station remained closed, yellow tape flapping in the wind. A makeshift memorial growing on the platform, flowers, candles, photos of the 5 who died. Tyler Reed's hiking boots sat among the tributes, a note from his sister pinned to them. "You loved these mountains. I hope you're at peace." The air was thick with questions. How had this happened and what came next? Danny Carver couldn't stay away. He returned to the station each morning, helping rangers piece together the attack, his hands still stained with the memory of blood. "She came from the freight yard," he told Carl Bennett, pointing to the grain-strewn tracks. "Must have been the spilled grain. Smelled it from a mile off." Carl nodded, his face grim. "We've seen it before. Bears getting drunk on fermented grain, losing their fear of humans." He'd read reports of grizzlies killed by trains, near Glacier Park, drawn to the same temptation. But a station? That's new. Danny's jaw tightened. "We should have cleaned it up sooner," he said, guilt gnawing at him. The town demanded action. At a packed community meeting in the Whitefish High School gym, voices clashed. Some called for the bear's death, others for better protections. "Kill her before she comes back," shouted a local hunter, his face red with anger. But a biologist from the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department, Dr. Ellen Harper, urged caution. "She's a mother protecting her cubs," Ellen said, her voice steady. "Killing her won't fix the problem. We're the ones encroaching on their land." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Clara Hensley, listening on her radio from Willow Creek, understood Ellen's words. She'd seen the wilds balance with her bobcats, but she knew the town's pain ran deep. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lily Harper decided to leave Whitefish. Their dream trip shattered. "I can't stop seeing it," Lily told Ethan, packing their bags, Mia clinging to her leg. Ethan nodded, his camera untouched since the attack. "We'll go home," he said, but his voice was hollow, the mountain's magic tainted by blood. Maria Lopez took a leave of absence, her laughter replaced by nightmares, her hands still shaking when she heard a loud noise. Danny, though, stayed on, driven by a need to understand, to make sense of the loss. He met with Ellen, poring over maps of the Grizzly's range, noting how new developments had sliced through her territory. "We pushed her here," he said, his voice low. "Didn't we?" By March 25th, rangers found the Grizzly's den near the Flathead River, her cubs curled inside, but she was gone. Hunting, they guessed. "We can't wait for her to come back," Carl told Danny, setting traps baited with meat. "Too dangerous." Danny nodded, but his heart twisted. He thought of the cubs, orphaned if their mother died, and wondered if there was another way. The town held its breath, waiting for closure, unaware that nature had one last surprise in store. Spring crept into the Flathead Valley by late March 2025, the snow melting into rivulets that fed the Flathead River, the pines whispering with the promise of renewal. But Whitefish remained on edge, the train station attack a wound that wouldn't heal. The grizzly mother hadn't been caught, her traps untouched, her tracks vanishing into the wilderness. Rangers scaled back their search, the cubs relocated to a rehab center, their future uncertain. "She's gone deep," Carl Bennett told Danny Carver, his voice heavy with resignation. "Might never see her again." Danny nodded, standing on the station platform, now cleaned but scarred, the memorial still blooming with flowers under a gray sky. The town tried to move forward. The station reopened on March 30th, its windows replaced, the blood scrubbed away, but the air felt different, warier, heavier. Danny returned to work, his clipboard in hand, his eyes scanning the trees more often than the tracks. "We're putting up electric fences," he told Maria Lopez, who'd come back, her smile tentative but growing. "And no more grain spills. We're learning." Maria nodded, pinning a new shamrock to her jacket, a quiet defiance. Ethan and Lily Harper sent a letter from Seattle, a photo of Mia playing in a park, a note thanking Danny for his courage. "We'll never forget," they wrote, and Danny tucked it into his desk, a small light in the dark. But nature had its own way of closing the chapter. On April 1st, 2025, as Danny locked up the station at dusk, a low rumble shook the ground. a sound he knew too well. He turned, his heart racing, and saw her. The Grizzly mother standing at the forest's edge, her massive frame silhouetted against the twilight. She was alone, her cubs gone, her eyes locked on Danny's. "You," he whispered, frozen, his hand inching toward the bear spray on his belt. But she didn't charge. She stood there, her breath steaming in the cold, her gaze heavy with something Danny couldn't name. Grief, maybe, or recognition. Then came the yowls, familiar, wild, echoing from the trees. 4 bobcats emerged, their spotted coats glinting in the fading light, their eyes glowing gold. Danny's breath caught. He'd heard of Clara Hensley's story, the old woman from Tennessee whose bobcats had saved her barn, their bond a legend in wildlife circles. "Whisper, bramble, flint, clover," he murmured, naming them from the tails. They moved as one, circling the Grizzly, their snarls low and fierce, a warning she couldn't ignore. The Grizzly huffed, her ears flattening, then turned, lumbering, back into the forest, her shadow swallowed by the pines. The bobcats lingered, their gazes shifting to Danny, a silent acknowledgement before they too vanished into the dusk. Danny stood there, the station quiet behind him, the weight of the past 2 weeks lifting just enough to let him breathe. "Nature's got its own justice," he said to himself, a tear slipping down his cheek, not from fear, but from awe. Whitefish would heal, scarred but stronger, a town that had faced the wild and found a fragile peace. And somewhere in the mountains, the Grizzly roamed, her story unfinished, a reminder that the line between man and beast is thinner than we think.